Good morning. My name's Daniel Lee. I'm from the University of Tasmania. Thanks for coming to listen to me talk about hidden curriculum and the role of music in higher education in cultural perpetuation. I'm in the third year of a PhD program at the University of Tasmania. My study is examining contemporary popular music courses in Australian tertiary institutions with a focus on guitar pedagogies and curriculum content. I'm asking questions regarding the implications of current practice on the voice of Australian guitarists in local and global communities of practice. I found 25 courses where a student could study a Bachelor of Music, so Australian Qualifications Framework Level 7, in contemporary popular music, majoring in performance with the guitar as their primary instrument. My study can most simply be described as an ethnography. However, it can more accurately be described as a phenomeноgraphically oriented, multi-sited, distance online comparative ethnography. Data were collected initially via surveys and by collecting unit descriptors from every core unit of every course, plus any other units that related to guitar, performance, or any other topics that were felt might address the research questions. I then conducted interviews with 32 participants. And if any of you are good at maths, you'll notice that a few of my participants identified as both alumni and educators. Data analysis was conducted using the procedures of inductive thematic analysis as informed by Brown and Clark, Sarantakos and Bryman. One topic that was developed using this inductive technique was hidden curriculum in Australian CPM courses. So what is hidden curriculum? Here is a definition formulated from the literature. Objectives of course design or delivery practices not explicit in the curriculum, course outlines or stated outcomes. However, one thing I would like to add from my own studies data is personal agendas of the educators. Hidden curriculum objectives found in the literature include social justice issues, developing tolerance and motivation, religious issues, improved spatial and temporal reasoning, societal and emotional skills, as well as political issues. Hidden curriculum objectives of music education specifically include enhancing verbal intelligence and executive function, developing brain plasticity and speech, and enhancing the auditory cortex. However, the one that I would like to focus on for this presentation is a form of structural functionalism, maintaining cultural norms in the face of potentially threatening cultural developments. In a number of non-Western countries, an unwarranted onward march of Westernisation is being observed as potentially threatening to the local cultural heritage. The younger generations now have ready access to Western popular culture and are abandoning their own in favour of it. Governmental bodies, including UNESCO, see this as concerning. In some countries, the examples I have listed here are from Thailand, Malaysia and Ghana. In some countries they've employed music education as a tool to combat this unwarranted enculturation. In Brazil, Alonso used the strong metaphor of cannibalization to describe Western influence on the local traditional musics. Another study in Malaysia found a strong focus there on STEM subjects is making it more difficult for music education to have cultural influence. It was acknowledged in my data that there is a distinct Australian voice in terms of performance practices of Australian CPM guitarists within the larger global idiom of contemporary popular music. Thus, a global phenomenon is observed. More on that in a few minutes. However, when asked to describe or define just exactly what this Australian voice is, participants typically found it difficult, especially using traditional musicological terminologies. The one phenomenon that was most present in the data is Australian guitarists' sense of rhythm, typically exemplified by Malcolm Young of AC/DC. This sense of rhythm was also found to be a prominent feature of Australian Indigenous rock guitarists. Students of the course at Australian National University are expected, as part of their assessment, to be able to recognise these aesthetic signatures. The study revealed indicators in the data implying a hidden curriculum role of cultural perpetuation were present in 23 of the 25 Australian CPM courses examined. Examples of these indicators include compulsory repertoire containing Australian material, Units or entire semesters where Australian material was studied. Ensembles performing exclusively Australian material. And the use of compositions as exemplars in theory, or the use of Australian compositions as exemplars in theory classes and units of study on Australian culture and history. I would like to employ the metaphor of the palimpsest to discuss my findings. This definition of the palimpsest states that it's an ancient writing surface where the original content has been erased so that new content can be added over the top. However, most often the content wasn't so much erased as just whitewashed over, so the original content was still there underneath the new layers. Bajol Smith states, to understand a cultural palimpsest, one must possess the linguistic and cultural tools to decode and perform the substitutions and to appreciate their sonic, cultural, practical and historical foundations. It has been shown the performance practices of Australian CPM guitar players have been chronologically developed upon those of previous generations, creating metaphysical, musical, cultural palimpsests. Performance practices of guitar players are, in some Australian tertiary institutions, being taught in ways as to deliberately continue to develop these existing cultural palimpsests. In this research, pedagogical practices were found that engage with existing cultural outputs, in conjunction with imparting linguistic and cultural tools to appreciate the sonic, cultural, practical and historical foundations, thus creating layered musical cultural practices. The education of the next generation of Australian CPM guitarists can be viewed as an ethno-aesthetic issue. Delange's early work on ethno-aesthetics in Africa claims appreciating an aesthetic is only possible inside the defined and properly understood socio-cultural context. Her external perspective has traditionally been considered the norm for definitions and procedures of ethno-aesthetics. However, recent redefinitions of ethno-aesthetics allow for culturally internal examinations of the arts. Rubino states ethno-aesthetics can be analogous to ethnography. However, the studies are conducted through a small lens and therefore may not encompass the whole society or culture. My study's small lens is the education of guitar students in tertiary CPM courses. Bajol Smith reformulated Delange's concepts of ethno-aesthetics to conduct research here in Florida on the local subcultures of surf communities and the members' musical preferences. The adaptation of Delange's concepts allowed her study to overcome the simplistic view that the cultures in question were aesthetically homogeneous worldwide. She was able to show how various sub-communities differed from one geographical locale to another, while still remaining within the broader cultural identity boundaries. My study found localised sub-communities exist in Australian CPM and feature unique identifiers. It was acknowledged that culturally identifiable markers of knowledge, customary practices and skills relating to CPM guitar performance are shared via curriculum and via communities of practice surrounding Australian higher education music faculties. The first Australian rock and roll band to have a #1 hit on an international chart was the Easybeats with their 1966 song Friday on My Mind. All members of the band were immigrants from Scotland, England and the Netherlands. Their musical voice was heavily influenced by the Liverpool sound. I found very little mention of them in my data. The most prominent act mentioned in my data were AC/DC, another band formed entirely of immigrants. They were influenced by the Easybeats as two members, Malcolm and Angus, were the younger brothers of Easybeats rhythm guitarist and songwriter George Young. However, AC/DC's lead guitarist Angus Young also cites American R&B artists as the most significant influence on his performance style. Another globally prominent voice of the Australian guitar community is the band INXS. Their rhythm guitarist cites influences from America and England, most notably Nile Rodgers. The Australian guitarist with the largest international online footprint is Tommy Emmanuel, who also featured prominently in my data. He cites both American and British acts, as well as Australian ones, as being heavily influential on the development of his personal playing style. So, globalisation has therefore played a significant role in the ethno-aesthetics of Australian CPM guitar performance practices. The study found 21st century education institutions acknowledge globalisation and incorporate it in their curricula. In this way, current CPM courses are embracing the ethno-aesthetic practices of the early progenitors of Australian CPM and are continuing this cross-cultural tradition. Students of today's courses are building on the existing cultural capital and, by embracing globalisation within the curricula, are building on and expanding this same cultural platform. The term glocalisation was adopted by Robertson as a way of incorporating micro-sociological perspectives into pre-existing macro-sociological discourse. He observed what he described as a misleading mythology surrounding concepts of globalisation. Localised phenomena were found to defy global homogenisation. The introduction of internet-based communications and the resulting development of online communities has had a dramatic influence on glocalisation. Access to online music catalogues and online music discussion forums were features of early high-speed internet user activities. Research has found the use of the internet correlated with the growth of personal networks and local community involvement. Here in Florida, Bajol and Smith found a sense of simultaneous global and local musical cultural identity markers in her interviewees. There is a similar sense in the local and global in communities of Australian guitar players. These communities exist in both real-world and virtual spaces, sharing resources and discussing guitar-related topics. Dawes' research on guitar cultures around the world found the guitar had both an international appeal and localised cultural expressions, thereby making it, the guitar, a global phenomenon. Online communities of practice observed in the data provide social links for the local communities surrounding each educational institution. Participant activities within local and global communities were observed, and evidence for educators' agendas and curricular links to these activities were also found. Educators felt the need to encourage students to engage with local communities, as the students were naturally engaging primarily with the global and ignoring the local. Student participants from individual institutions were found to be members of local online guitar communities. In many cases, these were institution-based. These same participants were also active in global guitar communities, which were also accessed by participants affiliated with other institutions and even guitarists from other countries. Thus, the data reveals global perspectives in the curriculum and among activities occurring in the participant cohort. In some cases, participation in these local and global guitar communities of practice was actively encouraged by the educators and/or the curriculum design. Encouragement from educators for students to explore a global musical voice regarding performance style was also found in the data. By building on existing cultural capital and engaging with historical cultural practices, current curriculum design and pedagogical practices are continuing to develop historically founded cultural palimpsests. By engaging with globalisation, current education practices are also continuing Australian CPM guitar ethno-aesthetic development in a similar fashion to its founders, yet with a 21st century modality allowing for a broader consumption of cultural influence, including world music. However, local communities of practice surrounding higher education institutions and localised settings within Australia were found to promulgate local musical idioms, defying the development of a single homogeneous Australian voice in the global musical community. Williams' course included a unit on cultural perspectives of music. He described the content as built around ethnomusicological study. When asked if he found this study has influenced his performance style, he responded, "Absolutely, absolutely." Thanks for listening. Has anyone got any questions?